And for more on that, on what stood out actually at this year's meetings at Davos, I'm joined by William Lee, Chief Economist and Managing Director at Global Economic Advisors. William, great to have you back on the show. And first up, what stood out most from this year's Davos main stage and sideline conversations?
You know, Diego, this year, the typical talk that we see at Davos, the globalism, the dialogue about rules-based order, promoting the goals of globalization, has really shifted dramatically. And instead, we are discussing a more realistic, results-oriented order rather than a rule-based order that is going to be coming about from a variable geometry, a differential geometry that Carney talked about. And Christine Lagarde has hit it right on the head. We have a shift in how it is that global nations will be conducting business. They're going to be anchored by China and the US on the two ends as the two largest economies in the world, and each country will be developing its own relationships within the order, with each other, and with the two anchors in the needs-based way. They're going to do it in a way that will promote the needs of the two economies and eventually the world itself. So I think the ad hocness, the flexibility of the new order is something that would probably lead to better prosperity than the old rule-based order based on one antiquated treaty.
And William, China's vice premier spoke about economic and technological priorities. How did those messages land with Western leaders and global investors at the forum?
Actually, from what I've heard, Vice Chair, the Premier's messages of building bridges and not walls is really, I think, what Western investors want to hear, because it's a signal that says China is open for relationships that bridge differences in political systems and economic systems, but the objective is to get the right results and prosperity for all. And I think that's a message that's well welcomed by both East and West and North and South. Capital will find a place to go where it will be used most productively. And for China to really make this into real actionable advice, China's going to have to put in place better institutions that allow investors to have information access, to have a little bit more security in their intellectual property and property rights. But I think the message overall is a very positive one of saying China is open to be building bridges to everybody.
And just like last year, right, AI was a major theme at the WEF. What were the most important takeaways for companies, for governments in these fields?
Actually, the most important takeaway that's different from last year is that last year AI was a possibility. This year, it's an absolute reality. And China has proven to be at the forefront of that, because China has shown so much progress in the way of not only developing the AI models, but also in its applications, and especially in the field of robotics. And I think the competition between China and the US will be a very productive one if we can have a competition of symbiosis. That is, we both make use of what we're strong in. The US has, and the West has been very strong in building chips that are very powerful. China has been very, very good about having cheap energy. And those are the two very important ingredients in making AI developments come to life and be productive for all. So I think the world is waiting for US and China to create the kind of symbiosis that's needed to create the applications that will improve productivity around the world.
And William, US President Donald Trump's rhetoric around Greenland made headlines this week, right? How did that go down globally?
Well, Diego, I think that's a good example of the flexible geometry that we're talking about. I think President Trump and the policies he's put in place in the United States has emphasized to the world globalization comes about by making each country as strong as possible. Every leader is going to be looking after the interests of its own people. And in terms of the security of its people, hemispheric security, protecting the Arctic, protecting the U.S. national security in the Arctic, all right, is something that's going to involve changes in standard relationships. And I think the approach that he took is typical Trump 101 in terms of his art of the deal. All right, he asked for something outlandish and really got pretty much what he wanted to settle for.
Great. And looking ahead, did leaders in Davos sound more optimistic this year? How did they sound going forward?
You know, Diego, I think Christine Lagarde summed it up very nicely when she said, we are looking to make progress and that enables the economies and political systems to generate the prosperity that we need for all. And we need to break the old rules that don't work anymore. And this is me speaking now, not Christine Lagarde, but I think she means to say that we need to have a more flexible set of relationships because the world is changing very rapidly, and each country and each set of countries will find its own way to creating the kind of alliances it needs to make the new system work. And I think the flexibility of these relationships will shift over time as the environment changes and as AI and other technologies come in and change the way in which we're able to do business with one another.